So hi, good morning. Welcome to this another series a lecture about applied management science. So ngayon ang pag-uusapan natin is about forecasting. Okay? So managers every day managers make decisions without knowing what will happen in the future. So inventory is ordered though no one will know what sales will be. Okay? So new equipment is purchased though no one knows the demand for that particular product, and also investments are made though no one will know what will be the profit in the next few days or in the next future. Okay? So managers are always trying. So you guys or future managers are always trying to reduce this uncertainty and to make better estimates of what will happen in the future. So accomplishing this is the main purpose of forecasting. So that will be our topic for this day. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so this will be the learning objectives for these particular lectures. Number one, we will understand and know when to use the various families of forecasting models. And then number two, we will discuss the components of time series, which is the trend, the seasonal component, the cyclical, and then the random component. Okay, so forecasting, according to the book, the main reference book that we are using to Berenson or to render, I mean render in this particular case, there are 8 steps. Okay, 8 steps in doing a forecast. Okay, so number one, we have to determine the use of that particular forecast. So what are we trying to obtain here? Are we trying to forecast the sales? Are we trying to forecast the number of installs? So what do you really want to be? So this is quite similar to the previous topics that we had. So we have to identify first, what do we want to do? Do we want to maximize or do we want to minimize this particular variable? So that's very important step. So to determine what is the thing that we're trying to do here. So number two, select the items or quantities that are to be forecasted. Like just what I mentioned a while ago, we're talking about sales, the number of installs, or so on and so forth. Okay, and then number three is we're going to determine the time horizon of the forecast. So this is very important. So is it 1 to 30 days for the short term, or 1 month to 1 year for the medium term, or we're talking about a long term, which is more than a year? Okay, so very important that we know the time horizon. Okay, so number four, since we already identified the time horizon, okay, in this particular for this in particular case, so we can now select the forecasting model or models that we are going to use to answer the question or the managerial question that we have. Okay, so number five, we are going to gather the data or the information needed to make the forecast. Okay, of course, we have to gather the data for us to extrapolate the particular variable that we want. Okay, and then number six, we have to validate the forecast. So we have some tools to check the quality of the forecasting, the result of the forecasting model that we have. Okay, and then make the forecast. Of course, we after obtaining the model, after obtaining the tool to make a forecast, we really have to conduct the forecast. Okay, to really apply the things, to really apply if we and to see if the forecasting model that we use is quite appropriate. And then, of course, number eight, we have to implement the results. Okay, for example, the result or the forecasting model is the number of items that we need to purchase for the next season or for the next month is this type of. So we need to implement that one. And then later on, we have to assess the quality of the forecasting model or the quality of the forecasting model that we have, and then improve it, so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the 8 important steps when you will be doing a forecasting model. Okay, so next is eto, we have to discuss the types of forecast. Okay, so what are the three? So there are three important forecasting models or the forecasting techniques. So number one, we have the qualitative model. Okay, and then number two, we have the time series methods, and then number three, we have the causal models. Okay, so Let's discuss first these qualitative models. So, by definition, according to Render et al., qualitative models are forecasting techniques based on judgmental or subjective factors. Okay, so if we're going to try to remember in our discussion in statistics or in research that we have previously two types of research, where the quantitative and qualitative research, but now we are trying to incorporate the mixed methods. Okay, the combination of the quantitative and the qualitative method. Same with the forecasting techniques here. We also have the qualitative models. We are using a judgmental or the perspective of the particular group person. Like for example, you're going to conduct an FGD, a group of teachers. So what's the relevance of using this qualitative model? So qualitative model, according to Render, is since the forecasting methods, we use the previous data. Normally in quantitative forecasting methods, we use the previous weeks, the previous months to predict the future, okay, to predict the future values. However, for example, in some cases that you are going to present a new product, for example, an iPad or another product, or you want to introduce a product, you don't know, you don't have yet the previous, of course, the sales of that particular because you are introducing to the market. So that is why we are selecting a group of person, a group of experts in that particular field to assess to make a forecast for that product based on their perception or based on their judgment. So that is why qualitative models are introduced. So there are a few methods that we have here. So we have the Delphi method, the jury of execution, the sales force composite, and then the consumer market survey. But in this particular lecture, in this particular book, specifically in this particular book, our main concern here is in the quantitative part of the forecasting. But it's good to know that there is also another way, which is the qualitative type of doing a forecast. Okay. So next we have the this one. We have the forecasting models and the causal models. So forecasting models are identified as causal models if the variables to be forecast is influenced by or correlated with other variables included in the model. So basically, this is quite similar to the things that we discussed last semester in our inferential statistics. So the tools that we are going to use to check the causal models is we are going to use the regression analysis and then the multiple regression analysis. So primarily, the main difference of the simple or the regression analysis and the multiple regression analysis is the number of independent variables, right? So if you want to predict sales using customer satisfaction, then you are going to use regression analysis or simple regression analysis because you only have one independent variable, which is, let's say, customer satisfaction. And then the dependent variable is with respect to the sales. However, in reality, there are a lot of variables. There are a lot of things that will affect that particular product or that particular dependent variable or the sales. So that is why we have to introduce more variables, two or more variables, to predict that particular sales. So we use the what is so called the multiple regression analysis. So basically, the cause, the cause and effect, okay, the predictors. So we are going to use the predictor to infer what will happen to that particular variable, to that particular dependent variable. Okay, so that is the causal models. But again, we already discussed this one in the last semester. So we will just try to have a recap later on. Okay, but our main focus in this particular chapters, succeeding chapters here, is about these time series methods. Okay, so by definition, according to Render, by definition, a time series model is a forecasting technique that attempts to predict the future values of a variable by using only historical data on that one variable. Okay, so basically, one variable, you're going to use the historical data of that particular variable, for example, sales, okay, to predict the future variable, the same variable in the future value. Okay, we only use one variable. So these models are the extrapolations of the past values of that series. Okay, so normally the time series methods, if you're going to plot it in a scatter plot, okay, if you're going to use a causal model, a simple linear regression model, and then the variable, the x here, which is which is the X, which is the independent variable, let's say a customer satisfaction, and then we have the Y here as the sales. So what you can observe in a time series model is the horizontal axis, the X axis is with respect to that particular time. Later on, we will see some graphs there. Okay, so for example, if we're going to forecast the sales for the loan mower, so we will use the past sales of that loan mowers. Okay, so if we want to predict the for example, in my particular case, the number of installation of my app for the next days, of course, I will be using the number of installs for the past days. Okay, so that is the time series method. So to summarize the types of forecast, we have here the models, the overall models here. So we have these forecasting techniques. We have the three techniques: the qualitative, the time series, and then the causal model. So for the time series model, as what we can see here, we have the moving averages, the exponential smoothing, the trend projections, and then the decompositions. We will not discuss all of this today. Okay, we will reserve that one for the next lectures. Okay, so basically what we are trying to explain here is only the introduction about the forecasting models. Okay, and when to know when to use the particular tools. Okay, so next that we are going to discuss is this one, very important things. So we have to discuss the components of a time series. Okay, since I've mentioned a while ago that our focus here is mostly on the time series quantitative type. Okay, we will not focus on the qualitative and then the causal models. Okay, so the components of the time series models here. So we have the components. We have the trend, the T, the seasonal component, the cyclical component, and then we have the random components. And I will be giving some examples later on of about these trends, seasons, and then cyclical, and then the random and very dangerous random component. Okay, so let's discuss first the trend. So when we are talking about the trend, so according to Render, the trend T component is the general upward or downward movement of the data over a relatively long period of time. So basically, when we are talking about trend, we are only talking about the downward, or is it in the downward or in an upward movement. So basically, we can see this trend. For example, let me apply this trend on my uh, on the software that I develop using the electrical wiring simulators that I have in Google Play. So if we're going to graph the number of this is the number of active users for the past 365 days. Okay, so as of now, the total as of February 8, I have 19,833. So as what we can see in this particular graph here, although we can see that there is a steep curve, okay, a steep increase for the last days, and then medyo nag-steady state siya for the succeeding days. But technically speaking, we can see that there is an increase in trend. Okay, there is an upward trend. Okay, so the other application of the trend that we can normally see. Okay, so this is my personal experience, but there are also some forecasting or the trend that is normally used in a stock market. For example, in this particular case here, oh, so for example, this is stock market trend here. So as what we can see, some of the portions here, okay, some of the areas here, for example, in this particular case, so overall, you can see that there is some movement there. Okay, above that particular red line, the red arrow above there is a movement. There is an upward. Okay, there is a downward, upward, downward, then upward again, downward, upward. So there is a movement of upwards and downwards. But basically, when we are talking about trends, we are talking about the long term. Okay, we are talking about the long term, trend of this particular stock. So we can see in this particular case here that the movement is upward. The trend is moving upward. Okay, so that is why it is very important, based from my experience investing in stock market. It's very important that we have to consider the type of investors that you want. Do you want to be a short term investor, or do you want to be a long term investor? So if you want to be a long term investor, so you can take a look at the trend there. Okay. However, when you will be doing a short term investment, very important, in our case, very important that we have to study the volatility of that particular stock, the movement, the downward and upward of that particular stock, because we are not investing only for a couple of years, okay, 10 years. We are not doing that, okay. So we will try to invest for a couple of months or sometimes weeks, or some investors do it on a daily basis. Okay, so we try to study this one. We try to study the trend in a weekly or in a monthly basis. Okay, but in the long run, so this particular trend here is moving upward. Okay, so the next is the seasonal. The seasonal. So by definition, the seasonal or the S component is a pattern of fluctuations above or below an average of value that repeats at a regular interval. Okay, repeats at a regular interval. So Valentine's is fast approaching. Okay, so it means to say what's the implication if Valentine's is fast approaching? So the price of flowers, the price of chocolates will really increase. Okay, so the sales for flowers, the sales for chocolates will increase. Okay, but there are also some cases that in the seasonal, for example, season of durian, so there are a lot of durian that you can see around. But so we can observe that when the number of course, supply and demand. So if the number of supply is way above, so the price for that particular commodity will become lower. Okay. So however, the I would just like to clarify this. So when we are talking about season, we are talking about 4 months or 5 months, or in a year we have four seasons, something like that. Okay. So technically speaking, according to render, so if a seasonal component is present in the data, the number of seasons depend on the type of data. So it does not necessarily imply that seasons will take months. Okay? So, for example, with the quarterly data, there are four seasons because there are 4 quarters in a year. Okay? So that's the season that normally we know, the four seasons, the 4 quarters. So, however, we can also treat the monthly data. Okay? So if we're going to consider this one in monthly data, so there will be 12 seasons in a year because we have 12 months in a year. So we can also consider the monthly. And then, of course, in a daily basis, or let's put it in a applied way. So if you're going to have a store, a retail store, or a grocery store, something like that, you will be able to identify the season, or the days that you will have a very high or above the average sales. For example, my sales for this particular week, every week, my sales is way above the average every Saturday or Sunday. So probably there are a lot of customers there, or because of course it's weekend, so everybody will spend time with their family or so on, like that. So we can treat that one as a season, okay, in a weekly basis or in a daily basis in a week. Okay. So next is this. Of course, there is a graph. So the graph here, the series number one. So that's just the random variables. Then we're trying to create a straight line there. Then we are talking about the season. So it's up and down, but it is quite consistent in every week. So for example, you can say that it is really a seasonal if it repeats happening almost every week. So for example, in my previous example about the grocery stores, so if the sales is always way above the average every Saturdays and Sundays, so you can consider that one as a season. Okay, a seasonal factor, a seasonal component in your analysis. Okay, so next is we have the cyclical. Okay, so so this type of component, the cyclical component in a forecasting model, according to render, is a very difficult to predict. So this is the most difficult component to predict. Okay, why? Because seasonal variations. So as what I mentioned, seasonal variations are very consistent in length. Okay, they repeat in magnitude, they repeat in length, and much shorter. So the seasons are always repeat in less than a year. However, in cyclical, the it happens every no, the definition. Let's take a look at the definition first. The cyclical component of time is a pattern in annual data that tends to repeat every several years. So several years, for example, 10 years. So this particular increase or decrease in the particular sales on a particular variable that we want keeps on repeating every several years. So that is why it is very difficult to really predict these cyclical components. And then also that is why I would like to emphasize this one. So that is why in the next succeeding lectures that we will have, so we will only discuss the short range and then the medium range forecast. Okay, so less than a year. Okay, so next, this one is the most dangerous. This one is the most dangerous component, which is the random factor. Okay, technically speaking, when you say random, so we can relate this one in the previous semester, the random variables. We have to do the random selection. But in forecasting, this is a very dangerous variable. This is a very dangerous component. So the random, you will know in a while. So the random R component consists of regular, unpredictable variations in a time series. So this unpredictability is very, very dangerous. This is very, very scary. Okay, so in order to give you some some example of this random variable is, let's take a look at this stock market graph here. So that a very red line is a very dangerous. It's a very dangerous drop price. Okay, so we can expect. Let's start our analysis in the leftmost. So the red decreasing, then we can see that there is increasing. So we're seeing some positivity here, there. Then there is a decrease, and then you see a consistent increase. Green, green, green. Okay, and then suddenly there is a drop. There is a drop price. Okay, so that is a very dangerous, and what we don't know what happened to that particular for this particular stock. Okay, so sir, how what if we can consider the news, or we have to consider? So normally, guys, normally there are some things that there are some classifications of the stock market traders that I know. So you have the fundamentalist on the technical person. The fundamentalist, they study they study the the what is so called the statistics of the particular company. However, when the technical, yung mga technical person, they only look at these particular graphs there and then study this particular graph and then predict if we're going to invest in this particular stock. Okay? So, yan. So, the randomness is very, very dangerous when you will be creating a forecast. Okay? So, that's it. So, if you have some questions or clarifications, please comment down below and I will try to answer your questions as soon as I can. So, see you in the next lecture about the continuation of these forecasting models. Okay, so good luck and God bless.